I would like to call the regularly scheduled Plan Commission for the Village of Tinley Park to order. At this time, can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Lori, could you please take a roll call?
Commissioner Gaskell.
Present.
Commissioner Gatto. Commissioner Lasciuto.
Present.
Commissioner Manny. Commissioner Shaw.
Present.
Commissioner Truxell.
Present.
Chairman Gray.
Present. Okay, we have a quorum present. We're going to move on to communications, and before we ask staff, I just want to welcome Mr. Kurt Truxell to the Plan Commission of Tinley Park. Welcome, Kurt.
Thank you. Golf clap, all right.
Good to have you aboard. With that, staff,
Take a bow.
are there any communications at this time? Okay. At this time, I'll ask for approval of the meeting minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the October 21st, 20?
Make a mission.
Second.
Okay. Motion made by Commissioner Gaskell, seconded by Commissioner Shaw. All those in favor of approving the October 21st, 2021 meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion is carried. We'll move on to item 1. The first item on tonight's agenda is a public hearing for the residents at Brookside Glen Magnuson Apartments, special use for a PUD substantial deviation. I've been informed by staff that the application submitted by the developer seeking the substantial deviation is incomplete, as it did not include a number of deviations from the original PUD ordinance. Therefore, I'd ask for a motion to continue the public hearing for the residents at Brookside Glen Magnuson Apartments, special use for a PUD substantial deviation, to December 16th, 2021, so that a completed application may be submitted and considered by this commission.
I make a motion.
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Gaskell. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Truxell. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All of those opposed? Okay, the motion passes. With that, hearing approval from the audience, with that, we'll move on to item 2 of tonight's meeting. Thank you, sir. Item 2 is a public hearing regarding tobacco and nicotine-related and related retail uses zoning ordinance, text amendment. It's a public hearing to consider recommending that the village board adopt a proposed text amendment to the Tinley Park zoning ordinance, amending section 2.b, definitions, and section V.b, schedule 1, schedule of permitted uses by use type, regulating tobacco and nicotine-related retail uses. So may I have a motion to open the public hearing at this time?
So moved.
Okay, Commissioner Shaw,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Lasciuto. All those in favor of opening the public hearing say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion is carried. I have received publication I have received certification of the public hearing notice being published in the local newspaper. Anyone wishing to speak on this matter will be sworn in to speak, but after the staff's presentation. So staff, whenever you guys are ready, please proceed with your presentation.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. We've lost our video. Are you able to see the video on your screen?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly. So for tonight, the public hearing, as Chairman Gray noted, will be for the zoning text amendment for tobacco and nicotine-related retail uses. Consider to amending zoning code as appropriate. So I'll go over the information as we talked about in the last meeting's workshop. At this time, our code dating from 1978.
Excuse me, members of the audience, if you can, okay, no worries. Okay, proceed, Lori.
Thank you. So as I said, our code dates from 1978. There is a lack of specific definitions and regulations. Staff does periodically review appropriateness for zoning regulations to identify any potential issues. So the reason that this is coming to us is partially because of the growth and evolution of product types and growing regulations among other communities. Our definition is fairly loose right now. Tobacco currently falls under just retail stores as permitted in our B2 community shopping and B3 general business and commercial districts. So at this time, the village holds general business licenses for 27 dealer locations. The village does not do inspections for completeness or accuracy. So these locations may not be complete. There may be additional locations not on the list. There's observed clustering, as we talked about in our last meeting. One location of note is the southwest corner of 80th and 183rd. There are also a couple of hookah cigar lounges in the village, and most importantly, this is coming to us due to direction given from the Committee of the Whole on September 7th, recommending specific definitions and consideration of special use in primary business districts. So for our existing regulations, which again are outside of the zoning code, are Chapter 120 and 124 and fee schedule from Chapter 110 provide some regulations. Chapter 120 does define a tobacco shop with a threshold of at least 65% of gross revenue. As Section 120 calls out to minimum of 100 feet distance from what is referred to commonly as certain institutions, school, childcare, other building used for education or recreational purposes for those under 18. So that's a fairly standard regulation you see in almost any community. And so for the existing use charts, as I noted, the retail permitted uses are above. Retail sales are prohibited in the legacy code. Cigar lounges are special use. Staff does not propose changing those, but merely clarifying the language on the retail sale of the tobacco. Here's an image, as we saw last time, of the location at the southwest corner of 80th and 183rd, a 6-tenant building with 4 as tobacco or vape-related primary type uses. With beyond that, here's an aerial that you saw last time that has another tobacco store, a liquor store, and then just for reference to show a child care facility more than 100 feet away from those uses. And here are the 2 cigar lounges on 159th. Staff's recommendation is remaining as before, to only look at the zoning code for revision with definitions and restrictions. So to basically change it to a special use in the B2 and B3 zoning districts. So the definitions remain very similar to what were proposed last time. The only difference is that we have initial capped, formally identified the terms of tobacco products and alternative nicotine products. We removed e-cigarettes from it, as e-cigarettes would be under alternative nicotine products. And going into the second definition, it's basically the same thing as before, so we still have the same exclusions. And then for the zoning chart, that would be as proposed in the draft ordinance. This is just simplified, excluding the other districts that it would not be allowed, just as special use in B2 and B3 for tobacco store and accessory in B1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, with the footnote of maximum of 1 tobacco store per zoning lot. And then for the legacy code, again, it's just clarifying that definition. So instead of retail use of tobacco, hookah, et cetera, it's simply tobacco store is prohibited. And then just to quickly go over the other additional regulations that we touched on in the last meeting, Chapter 120 has that 100-foot certain institution designation. Other types of regulations could be limiting signage or storefronts, proximity to other stores, capping the number, how you define it, the measuring, if it's from the building's portal or from the lot line. And in some communities, they've outright banned indoor smoking or sampling. And so to follow up on the workshop, just to recap some of those key points, the definitions were discussed by commissioners to have logical conclusions and align with our Chapter 120 and state statutes. There's discussion in comparison to cannabis. So staff would like to note that though the regulations for adult use cannabis were recently opened up, they still remain highly regulated, and our proposed tobacco amendment is much looser than that of the cannabis. And then for the rationale for consideration, it was reiterated that this was raised at the direction of the village board at the September 7th Committee of the Whole. So depending on the village board's direction and interest, that these restrictions may seem reasonable. There's also been business feedback that's been directed to the village questioning this clustering. Discussion on business performance was also mentioned, that if a business is doing well, then, and we don't have vacancy, then this could generally be a good thing. There's also discussion on, what the reasoning for these regulations could be, if it's on consistency to be consistent, if it was to be consistent with nearby communities, or if it was more towards public health. So those are points that could certainly be discussed if needed. To compare it to the other communities, here are just the bullets for our two neighbors of Orland Park and Frankfurt. They are considerably more restrictive than Village of Tinley Park. They both have caps. They both have significant distances from other tobacco stores. Orland Park, if their minimum distance to certain institutions is due to public right-of-way, they limit no signage, business markers, storefronts can face such institutions. The Village of Frankfurt also has a very wide listing of certain institutions, so they count parks, libraries, institutions that have 25% or more under the age of 21. So they also have more restrictive definitions, thresholding between the primary and accessory uses, 10% gross revenue or 10% gross floor area in which sales of other products are merely incidental. That's when you move into the primary use with them. So there's also other nearby communities that have additional regulations tighter than Village of Tinley Park, Mokina, Oak Forest, New Lenox. In the staff packet, there's a chart that kind of provided what some of these specific regulations were. The way that this has been affecting Tinley Park, on a planning and zoning level, staff does get a fairly significant amount of calls of businesses looking to come to Tinley Park. So on average, we might get 2 a week. So the call volume is one thing, but it's also indicating that perhaps some of these potential entrepreneurs wishing to open a store may or may not be contacting the neighboring communities and coming here. So, on top of that, it could be considered the density of such stores, could be considered a public health concern by some, and it could affect the quality of businesses neighboring in a multi-tenant building if it desired to be next to that type of business. Because again, right now, it's just retail permitted in B2 and B3. So for a recap on the discussion of existing businesses, they can continue as long as they're under the same ownership. They would not need to do any sort of additional application to consider or continue their operation. If they change ownership, then they would need to seek special use. And importantly, the regulations for special use would propose a maximum of one per zoning lot. So if there was already a business in that zoning lot, let's say it's a shopping center, it's one zoning lot, then that potential business would not be able to even apply for the special use. There are not distance requirements in this proposal. They could be just considered as part of the case-by-case special use consideration. And special uses tend to look at the impact and the context of the surrounding area, so this could be distances to other tobacco stores or other types of certain institutions that you consider sensitive areas. And so, per the staff report, as you noted, open items 1 and 2 that talked about the definitions were, to staff's understanding, resolved, and open items 3, 4, and 5 technically still are open. And to summarize, the open item number 3 is to require special use for tobacco and tobacco stores. That's the primary use. In B2 and B3, prohibiting elsewhere, including Legacy District. No, it was already prohibited in Legacy. Open item 4, maximum 1 per zoning lot. And open item 5, if a minimum distance should be considered. So that concludes the staff's presentation. I have a motion, and I also have the standards as well, if you're interested in seeing those.
Excellent. I will move on to our plan commissioners to ask them if they have any comments regarding those 3 open items or about item 2 in general. We'll start with Commissioner Lusciuto.
So I wasn't at the last meeting, and I know there was a lot of discussion about this. My concern is this an overreaction at this point? Are we looking at, the exception compared to the rule? I know we have this one area that's clustered with tobacco shops, but it's because it's in Will County on the border of Cook County. That's why they're all there. Is this an issue across Tinley Park, though, where you see a lot of this clustering, where you would need to amend the zoning statute then to combat that issue?
Well, the way that this regulation is proposed, the existing businesses, as long as they're under the same ownership, would be allowed to continue. The concern is for additional businesses to come in and create a higher density of that. So this is, again, in response to the Committee of the Whole's direction from September, and also for the effect that the staff is starting to see as we're getting multiple calls starting to come in. Village of Overland Park, their regulations, updating of the licensing, only went into effect earlier this year.
I mean, I get it. My concern is, you change the zoning statute. I understand that for the businesses that are there, but once they sell, then they have, whoever buys it has to come and go for a special use, which whether or not they'll get it is another question. But, you got the potential of creating a windfall for somebody, for one entrepreneur or whatnot that's in Will County as compared to all the competitors in Cook County. I mean, it is an issue where there's a reason why people are going to Will County is to avoid the sales tax that Cook County charges on them for tobacco products. That's just my concern. It just seems it's more of an overreaction. I understand if we were seeing multiple areas of clusters that this is becoming an issue, or we have a lot of issues where it's around other schools or other issues, but I just think, this seems like over-regulation due to an overreaction. That's my comment.
Could I ask something, Lori? Are some of those calls, because that is a substantial number to get a couple a week, and so do the people calling, do they typically tip their hand that they want? Because I agree with Commissioner Lusciuto that the Will County side makes it attractive to them in terms of that, but to hear that you get that many calls a week, I think it's probably good to have some sort of restrictions in place, only because to avoid said clusters, but it may be where it's just a localized bad optic. It could be like, but I can't imagine with that type of demand, you know, we wouldn't want to see some of these clusters everywhere in the community. I think it is somewhat reasonable to have those restrictions. But do these petitioners, or people just looking to see what's available, do they tip their hand on what sections of Tinley Park they want to bring their business to?
What typically happens is a person will call into the village and they will say they want to open a tobacco store, and they'll get transferred to planning and zoning, where we will ask them for a specific address so we can check the zoning district. We don't keep records of
Okay.
where those locations are, and obviously it's usually the call is not even more than a few minutes. It's a pretty quick call. In the calls in the last couple of weeks, the calls have been a little longer because I've explained to them this upcoming consideration.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, actually, yeah, they're trying to, before the window closes per se. I didn't mean to cut you off, Commissioner Lusciuto.
No,
Is there any other comments?
No further
Oh,
comment.
okay, thank you. Commissioner
I have
Gasko.
nothing.
Okay, Commissioner Truxell.
No, I'm just curious if, a zoning lot, that's my question, it's just, I'm not familiar with that, but would that include, an outlet in the same area? Like, a zoning lot includes any outlets? It's like 183rd and 80th. You've got that L-shaped strip mall, and then you've got that outlet where
That's its own lot.
Happy Bites, and that's a separate lot?
That's one zoning lot.
That's a zoning
And
lot.
then the strip center itself is in another zoning lot.
Okay, so that's really,
Strip centers only have one, and then in theory, the outlot.
okay,
But if you have a multi-tenant building on one.
That's one
outlot,
lot.
You can only have one
right.
lot.
So I believe Lori brought up the graphic. What is shown there, what would be, so in terms of the parcels that you were mentioning, or the outlots, what would be, if that was, we know it's not retroactive, so they can stay as is unless it switches ownership, as Lori mentioned, but what would that look like on that first building? Just one primary and one accessory, or just one primary? I have to look at that chart.
Well, accessory would be permitted.
Okay. So there, you could have up to something, or two almost, but not what's shown right here, although those are all primary, so it would only be one of those. Okay. The one thing I do want to mention that was brought up last time is, and I didn't know the history, but the childcare there was before all the tobacco was. And that is, I do think that is a kind of concern from a public health standpoint. Seeing the Orland Park and the Frankfurt standards, I know they use 1,000 to 2,000 feet. It may be beneficial, I know it's not proposed, but it may be beneficial to have some sort of language in there, although I think it's an open item 5, you guys mentioned the preferred measurement method. I would do it from the portal, not from the lot line, because if you have a big lot and it's in the middle of the lot, it might be excessive, but something from the door or the wall. But I know that's just, there's no language right now for distances, but it may not be bad to consider, because to prevent something like we saw on that slide.
Why it's also a special use too. I think we didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of having to measure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is pretty cut and dry, and it is a special use. Maybe that could be where someone makes an argument.
Right.
You know, it's a unique lot that, yes, it's, that's where we thought someone could make an argument in their special use if they wanted.
Okay. Any more comments?
The buildings can change.
Yeah, right, I agree. I 100% agree.
No, thanks, that clarified.
Can you back up a minute? I got
Sure,
one
yeah,
question.
absolutely, Commissioner Gaskell.
I don't, what's the objection to clustering? What,
I don't know if there's necessarily an objection. I think just there are uses that when clustered, can, create certain, aspects of the area, the community can affect it in some ways. And, I think there's just a desire because the other communities are regulating these more stricter. We're getting all of the influx of people trying to come here instead. And I think there's a concern of the potential effects on when you have these types of uses, all repetitive, what does it kind of do to the other businesses in the community and things like that. Similar to, I know like cannabis, when it first came out, there's still some things that who knows in 10 years what we'll be saying about it, but there are still some businesses that do not associate, that business as a complementary to their, they don't want to be near that, I hate to say it, but like Cash for Gold used to get that kind of a reputation, and communities wanted to spread those out so you don't create a super block of all liquor stores or
Pawn
all
shops.
things like that. They're just, and by nature, there are just some businesses that have a certain, aspect to it that you don't want to keep them all in one cluster.
well, okay, so taking the 180th, or 183rd and 80th Avenue, what is there in there, in one building, there's one of them six tobacco shops in one building?
It is a 6-tenant building, and 4 of those tenants are tobacco or vape. And then immediately behind it is another tobacco store.
Next to Gatto's.
Yeah.
You're right, and then a liquor store, which would have accessories.
So those are all considered clustered,
Oh, I mean, there's,
We would consider that clustering because it's,
whether it's one owner or 5 owners or 6 owners, it would be clustering.
well, the fact that you've got that many of that specific primary tobacco in one area is kind of high.
Well, I'm just asking, I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with that. I don't understand. I mean, we want businesses in Tinley Park. We don't want to chase everybody out. So that's why I'm just trying to get a handle on it.
It's similar to, how liquor isn't a by right thing in most communities. Liquor comes with a certain public health concern, and that's why they license them, and they have to come to the liquor commissioner. We did not want to go to the extent of licensing, because we thought that is just another, we thought zoning would be the better way to address the concerns of just trying to acknowledge that it's a necessary business, but let's not have, let's not be inundated by them. Let's have an option and a choice, to review them on a case-by-case basis and make sure that where they're locating is, there's some parameters and we can better regulate it.
Yeah, and I mean, and if this code makes these same businesses that want to come in spread out, then even better, right? I mean, you're not next door to a competitor, although some of these may be complementary. I don't know. I'm not a
I
tobacco
believe
smoker.
several of them are owned by the same people,
Oh, okay.
if not all of them.
I can't remember what the ownership is anymore. It's changed.
yeah, and the last I had heard, it was supposedly, the 4 spaces were supposedly 2 competing owners, is my understanding.
I just think it's a hot corner, because just like Frank said, Will County's right there. You have lower taxes, so it's on the doorstep, and that's a benefit, I think. But then I understand that if there's citizens in that area that are, questioning it coming to the village board, just gotta hear them out, but, yeah, it's,
Okay. Commissioner Shaw, any comments?
Thank you. So I just like to say a couple of points. I struggle with this one myself because I tend to follow where Commissioner Lasciuto is in siding towards less government intervention and control. But there's a balance that I think needs to be struck here in terms of the community and what makes a community attractive, and conversely, what makes a community unattractive. And I was just looking again at the standards for special use, and one of them is the extent to which a special use contributes directly or indirectly to the economic development of the community as a whole. And you could look at it the other way, the extent to which it detracts from economic development as a whole. And I think it's important that cluster at 183rd and 80th, it's been mentioned several times. I think you've stated it, but it's important to focus that that's being used as an example. I don't believe anyone intends for this to be aimed at those businesses. It's been pretty clear that that they, under any of the proposals, would be allowed to continue until a change of ownership. What I would say, and this is how I'm trying to look at it, those businesses are perfectly legal. They opened up and they followed all the rules and they're fine, right? If that didn't exist, would we design it that way as a community, right? It happened because they followed the rules and those are the rules there. And in hindsight, if we were to design it a certain way, how we would want it to look? And for my part, I don't think so, because to your point, it sets up a certain flavor or presentation to the community and surrounding communities, and I don't think that is one that the community overall would support, right? The clustering in particular. And there's some important points with respect to it being on the Will County, Cook County border. It's like when you see all the gas stations, one side of the line has one price or this price, and, we don't have Cook County taxes. This happens to be a particular borderline. I think we have a couple other areas that, left unchecked, could potentially follow that same path. So I do think it's important for us to get ahead of this and think about that. Again, it's legal now, so if we do nothing, that it could happen. But the question is that how we would we design it that way? I personally don't think that we would. And looking at our Will County neighbors to the south, it looks like many of them already have restrictions in place, some of them very restrictive, so that narrows the opportunity for these businesses, and it aims them straight at Tinley Park. So for all those reasons, I'm in support of pretty much everything that we have in here. With respect to the open points, I don't think that we, for the reasons Kimberly cited, I think that we should stay away from a specific distance. One of the other open points I had a comment on, I didn't write it down here. Could you bring those three up there? Distance. No, I guess that was the one. We had not settled, at least consensus, on a maximum per lot. Is that correct? I think it was tossed out, it potentially suggested one. Okay, I think that is reasonable myself. And I agree with the B2, B3, and also agree that the legacy district should remain as it is, consistent.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Shaw. In regards to some of the open items, as Commissioner Shaw had mentioned, and I think mentioning earlier about what you mentioned, Kimberly, about not spelling out the distance for open item 5, I would concur with Commissioner Shaw on that as well. If it ever does come to that, then it would be revisited. But I do think the chart here for the retail uses showing one store and then one accessory tobacco sales store, that's reasonable, right? You're at least having some sort restriction or regulation, to Commissioner Shaw's point, you probably wouldn't design that mini mall to have those tobacco clusters. You know, it happened within the rules, and it probably could happen somewhere else if it's not, at least tried to be regulated in some form. So I think this is a step in the right direction. I think it will, you know, and if there's people that are directed to Tinley Park because of the restrictive nature of Frankfurt and Orland Park, well, then at least they have opportunities to move in the community that aren't based on, you know, clustered areas, hopefully, so we'll spread them out. And not necessarily be a cluster, but with that, I have no more comments. Did staff get enough information for their open items? Enough direction?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. At this time, do you guys have any other comments, commissioners?
No.
No.
Okay, so is there anybody from the public wishing to speak on this item? If you, I was gonna say, if you have a comment, sir, you can come up, say your name. No, it's just for protocols, so they can get your name and get you in. I might be able to hear you, but this is a live stream, so,
You have to speak into the mic.
yes.
Sorry.
If not, that's fine. It's just
It's also a public hearing.
it's a public hearing, so.
I understand that.
You didn't,
I just think that
sir, if you're gonna speak, you need to approach there. I have to swear you in, give your name, and then make your statement. It's just a formality, so, yeah. Could you state your name, sir?
William Foster.
William Foster? Okay, do you swear or affirm that the evidence you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Sure.
Okay, thank you, William. Proceed.
I think it's a bad idea that you keep talking about this. It's okay to have, you know, tobacco stores here and then another lot, meaning you could be, you know, 50 feet away in another lot. You could be 100 feet away in another lot. You could be 200 feet away in another lot. And it's not a good idea. You want this to be a bedroom community, a good community. You're asking for trouble by bringing in all these tobacco stores. It's just not a good idea. Your reputation is built on being that kind of community,
Okay, well, thank you for your comments.
you know?
Just, can I comment on that?
Go ahead.
I agree. I'm all against big government and everything. But you're also saying it's okay to take whatever comes into the city.
William, these are for restrictions on tobacco and accessory tobacco stores coming in, so.
I understand. And I like the thought, what Frankfurt's doing and Orland's doing. The 1,000 feet is a great idea, especially because, I mean, I remember doing this when I was a surveyor, that we had to go from the door threshold of the tobacco shop all the way to the store of the children's center. And it had to be at least 1,000 feet. It couldn't be 3 feet under that. And I think it's a great idea to keep it a good distance and a measured distance, because people will try everything in the world to try to cut that corner.
Well, I agree with you in principle. What I would say, and I think this is what you were trying to say about having a specific number, Kimberly. To your point, if you have two lots that are arguably 50 feet away, and it sounds like you could have one here and one here, they would both be a special use. And if one existed and was approved, the second one that came in, it's likely that it would not be approved, simply because the plan commission would look at it and the village board would look at it and say, well, no, that's too close. Conversely, you could have two locations that were, let's say we threw a number 1,000, and it was 1,500 feet away, and we said, well, no, it's not good. They could come in and have an argument, say, well, your limit is 1,000 and we're 1,500 feet, so you're wrong to tell us no.
I'm talking about school daycares and things.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about a business to business. That's what I'm talking about, you know. Liquor stores should be the same distance away from schools and businesses. I mean, so why liquor stores and tobacco shops shouldn't be, I don't understand. But you shouldn't, I mean, you could take where the bank is, where, I know those shops specifically. You could just put it in the bank. It's a different lot, right? Do you need that many in this town, really? I mean, are we really that hard up for taxes?
My personal opinion, no, I don't think we need that many.
I mean, there's a tobacco shop over at Brookside, at the market there, right? How close and how many tobacco shops do you need in the town?
So your
And I know a lot of
Your
people that are
objection
against it too.
is
Pardon
about
me?
the,
Certain
the number?
institutions. His is, well,
and in particular,
yeah.
the certain institutions.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Schools and
Sure.
daycares, yeah.
Sure. But come on, you can't just take anything that walks in the town. She's talking about there's, how many people trying to call for tobacco shops?
On average, 2 a week.
Okay. That's a lot of tobacco shops in this town. You've got all the gas stations selling it, correct? I mean, how many gas stations are in the area? I mean, you've got the Speedway right next to it, all those, right? You've got the Gas and Goes and everything else around here. How many more places do you need to sell tobacco?
So you,
I'm-
is it fair to say that your thought is that we should be more restrictive than what we're even discussing?
I'm saying, yes,
Okay.
yes. Especially when it comes to children's centers, churches, and schools.
Well, I will tell you, for my part, I'm not dead set against having a number. And if the commission wants to discuss it, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, one of my notes here was certain institutions, and that was for what Orland and Frankfurt had. If there's a number associated to certain institutions, as you mentioned, Commissioner Shaw, where if it's business to business, the planning commission, Tinley Park has ultimate say. So that will be regulated, but somebody could be very well in the rules and be next to a daycare or something that falls under that umbrella of certain institutions, because even that graphic at 80th Avenue and 183rd, I mean, when you look at that and you see, you know, all those tobacco shops, accessory tobacco shops, and then the daycare, it does seem like that's out of place, for sure. As you mentioned before, I don't think anybody would plan it to be something like that, but, let me ask staff, Lori, would it be, or let me ask the commissioners, do you guys think that we should look into some sort of minimum distance from those umbrella of certain institutions, like you see here, the childcare? Is that reasonable?
Chairman, I mean, I would agree with that stance
Yeah.
more than worried about the clustering, to be honest with you. I'm for a fair market. Let them compete as long as they say they're not near a school or a park or, you know, any other facility, church or whatnot, you know.
Yeah.
But my concern was just with, you know, it seemed like they were concerned about the clustering, like, look at all these shops, you know, and I don't see that across Tinley Park. I see it there, yes, and I know why it's there, and I understand why it's there, but I'm not concerned about the cluster. But I do agree with your point, sir, about, you know, keeping it from a distance from these schools and childcare facilities and everything, so.
Yeah. Commissioner Gaskell, any,
No, I don't have anything else.
okay. Commissioner Truxell?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think it's reasonable. How many instances will we have where we have to measure the distance, you know, in the future? So I don't think it'll become unreasonable to set a distance, whatever that ends up being. But it's a reasonable request, I think, to consider it, yeah.
I agree with certain institutions under that umbrella.
I could fall in line with that.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable.
I know that's a change, Lori, but I would think, you know, is there room in, you know, any wiggle room where we'd be able to get that in the language for certain institutions? I know it's not in there as what it's drafted right now,
Right.
but, and this wouldn't include business to business, it would just protect those certain institutions. Does staff have any thoughts on this, to that effect?
I do need to note that elsewhere in the Village Code, Chapter 120, the comprehensive regulation of tobacco, we do currently have a regulation that says currently it's 100 feet from school, childcare facilities, or other buildings used for education, recreation programs for persons under 18. So that does not fall within the zoning code, so my only concern would be creating a conflict to
Oh, yeah.
other regulations.
Well, would the conflict be if we attempted to set a number that's less restrictive, right? I mean, I realize if we said, for example, it needed to be 1,000 feet,
Yeah,
that, it would be
more,
in conflict,
yeah.
right? And it would have to be reconciled in some way. But
Couldn't
again,
you
we're an
just
advisory
Could you
board.
just grandfather those businesses in that are already established?
Those, it won't be an issue based on what's proposed, because unless they switch ownership, and then
Right.
it would have to come to us. So it will not, it should not affect the current owners if they stay current owners, is my understanding.
And when this goes to village board, it could be something we know to the village board that they themselves can make this change to this code because it's under a different code, not under your purview.
Correct. And the thing is, I think the intent here to revisit this was in the interest of public health, and I think those are probably the target groups that are perhaps most vulnerable or susceptible. You know, the children or, you know, and persons under age 18. So I think it's reasonable to at least get that specified. I'm okay with the remaining portions of what was presented here tonight in terms of what, Lori, you have set up in terms of this. I would say if you can add that, however, as you mentioned, it's not under this umbrella. It would be under a different authority, and so I would, you know, request that be revisited, just so that the sake of the intent of this to, you know, avoid clustering and to, you know, minimize any public health concerns, that would be, you know, revisited, that number from 100 to whatever would be considered reasonable. We've seen 1,000, we've seen 2,000s in neighboring cities. You know, I would say that those are probably somewhere reasonable, that umbrella, whether it's 1,000, whether it's 2,000, whether it's 1,500. Somewhere in there, I think, would be probably a reasonable, 100 feet from, you know, Sandbox Preschool is not necessarily
So if I may?
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman?
absolutely.
I think I misunderstood what you were saying earlier about conflict. Because I think what I said was proposing that we have a minimum within the zoning. But I think I now understand what you meant. And our motion for changing the zoning would not include a minimum, but we would include a recommendation to the village board that they amend the building code, section 120. Is that, so is that what you're advising would be the appropriate way, so that we only address the minimum in one area of the code? Okay.
I think that's, yeah, that's fair. Should we modify our motion to include some language that says,
But the reason you didn't include a distance in the zoning is because there's already a distance in another code. And the village board can hash it out, maybe they decide, let's take it out of here and put it in the zoning, you know, I don't know, but you don't want it in two different codes.
I agree, because they can conflict. If we say this, that says this. Go ahead,
Just-
Commissioner Lucido.
So my question would be then, if they amended the other zoning code, making it 1,000
Yeah.
feet, would that then not necessitate the, this other motion to actually change the zoning, right? Because isn't this one mostly focused on the clustering issue and,
No, this one is just saying, in general, we want all tobacco stores to come in as a special use.
Mhm.
We want the ability to review them on a case-by-case basis. That's one.
Oh.
Two, within those reviews and regulating that use, we're gonna say that we would only consider a special use if you meet the requirement of being located one per zoning lot. You already have one there, sorry, we can't have a conversation with you right now, you're not eligible for a special use. So that's the other component. And then thirdly would be creating, an additional distance requirement, which we currently have under the licensing of tobaccos. That maybe that's the better way to say to the village board. It was discussed and we thought, you know, that it would best be to amend that, or the village board would turn around and say, well, we'll just throw it in the zoning code. We could regulate it either way. So that,
Anybody want to throw out a number?
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, Commissioner Shaw. I think 1,000 is reasonable. I would, but that would be me.
from the lot line,
I,
I'd go from the lot line, because buildings,
yeah, you mentioned they can, you know, wiggle and do that, so,
that's how we did cannabis too, as lot line.
okay.
Whatever our principles are for how we do it in other parts of the code, I
Be
think we should be
consistent,
consistent.
yeah, absolutely. Commissioner Lucido, do you have any, I know you're not you're somewhat against for the business to business, but in terms of for those,
I'm for all the other changes.
Yeah, right, you said-
I am kind of against the business
Yeah.
to business.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, the same, in the same, you know, lot or
Right.
whatnot. It does, you know, hinder, you know, landowners or whatnot if they can find somebody to lease their premises or whatnot and provide, you know, adequate competition and a free market, you know, I just,
I totally understand your reasoning, and it's logical. So, going to the certain institutions, like the schools and education, recreation,
I'm in total agreement with it.
what type of number would you?
I would agree with what the other commissioners said, keep it uniform, but 1,000,
Yeah.
1,000 feet.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Gaskell?
I'd be happy with 1,000 feet.
Commissioner Shaw? Commissioner Truxell?
So if we set a number at 1,000 feet, do we have any idea how that would impact any existing tobacco shops that may be 500 feet from a school today? I just-
Right, they would be considered non-conforming, they are allowed to exist as they are until an ownership were to
Right.
change, then they'd have to comply. So we wouldn't hurt any existing business,
Okay.
in theory.
And possibly between now and the time it goes to the board, you could even advise the board on what that impact would be specifically to any of them.
Right,
Because the board may want to scale it back to 500 feet.
Yeah.
when you change
Right,
the standard,
correct.
you may cause compliance issues, you know, that's something I'm familiar with what I do, so that would be my only fear. But if that doesn't impact businesses directly, when we set a number like 1,000 feet, yeah, I think that's reasonable compared to what the other villages are doing.
Yeah.
Well, Can I?
Yes,
can you
absolutely,
back up
Commissioner,
again?
yes, absolutely.
I think it would be a detriment to the businesses, because if you have tobacco shop, just using what we've been using for an example, and you've got one that's too close to the daycare center, but it was okay before, so.
Right.
So they sell that out to somebody else, and now it doesn't work, it doesn't fit into that parameter. They can no longer have a tobacco shop there, and that's what the new owner is wanting to buy, is the tobacco business. He's not looking to buy a building or a store and open a grocery store. He wants the business. He wants to, so now this poor guy that owns it can't sell it.
I would agree that is a real example, especially if maybe, I don't know who owns this right here. I don't know what the distance is from lot line to lot line, but you're right, especially, what if it was a family business and the owner's trying to sell it to his son, and now he can't, he has to keep it in
Right.
his name. So there could be some, unintended hardships for the owner selling his business
Right.
to somebody, rather than selling, of course, if he folds it and packs away and just, if he's leasing, I don't know if he leases or he owns, but,
That's common in any zoning. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the legacy code. You don't allow mechanic shops. The mechanic shop that was there on 167, First, I mean, that was one of their biggest challenges. They kept their business open just so that they could, continue the nonconformity to another mechanic shop. I mean, that happens. Sometimes uses that, were desirable or may not be desirable down the road, like at some point, there's a pain point, at some point, you either want the change to happen or you don't. And it's easy for me to say, I'm not the business owner, I totally understand, but it's just at the end of the day, like, that is sometimes what happens.
Well, it is a delicate balance, like I said, between free market and, the bedroom community. What type of community are we, if we could just design it exactly the way we want, what would we design? And I go back to what we're looking at on screen here, and to your point, if we enact a distance, then I don't know what that distance is, but potentially, we could be saying that, we thought we were saying only one of those could survive a change of ownership in the end, right? Only one, because it would be special use. But in effect, if we put a distance on there, we might be saying none of them could survive. And I guess what I would say is I have to go back to what I was saying earlier. If we were designing this by intent, knowing there's a daycare center there, is this what we would want in the first place? And I would say probably not.
yeah.
So we have to think of it in those terms. I mean, your point about the legacy code, Freddie Bear Sports has been there forever, but he can't sell it to anyone else. And I personally disagree with that, because that type of business is not allowed in the legacy district. That's the code,
Yeah.
right? I personally, I disagree with that. However, that is the code.
Oh, go ahead.
But we're talking about the detriment to any business, but specifically the tobacco business. That's what this brought up, and you'd mentioned it, as long as it isn't a detriment to the businesses, that's fine. Well, it is a detriment, that's what I'm saying. Because even if it's only one owner, he can't sell.
Oh, I recognize that, and
You know?
I'm acknowledging that.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is that we, as an advisory board, it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
We have to make that decision. Actually, the board is making
Yeah,
that
right.
decision. We're advising them on it. And, that's where we are.
Go ahead.
Can I just interject, and this would be a question for staff though, too. Does it go both ways then, too, right? So say, we pass the 1,000 feet, smoke shop opens up, now daycare comes in, they want to open up right in the same strip mall, right? Are they prohibited now from opening up in the strip mall because now they're putting that business in nonconformity?
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's a really good salient point.
Daycare centers, that's a special use, isn't it?
I believe so.
I mean, and I'm not even saying, I'm talking, you build a school, I'm
Well,
just
I mean-
talking, something getting built in that vicinity of that business.
That's a very good.
Logically, it would make sense.
Yes, right, that's a very good point. Yeah, absolutely. Is the reversal true? If it's a restriction, it should be a restriction both ways. So,
So if the tobacco store was there first, and with a vacant spot and daycare wanted to come in, I think that the response would be, you're too close to a, cigarette establishment, you would be allowed to occupy that location.
this does seem to be a very nuanced and delicate item on this agenda. It's not going to be without its casualties. I think I've heard so many different points of view, and I'm sure the village board has various points of view as well. And there's some that support certain things, or some things that are against certain things. And it is a delicate balance, I think, to use Commissioner Shaw's term. Unfortunately, you don't want to hamstring some owners too, that where they're unable to sell their business. I think that would be a disservice to somebody who may have had a business for X amount of years in Tinley Park. If they've been a loyal business owner there and they paid their share of taxes, I don't think you should hamstring them after the fact. However, again, to Commissioner Shaw's point, we would probably not design this map of all these tobacco stores and accessory tobacco stores next to a child care.
We
Although,
wouldn't have, but what's done is done.
correct, no, absolutely.
Well, but this is what happens as a matter of course in zoning. When you look at changes to the building code, to the fire code, the electrical code, if you have an existing house that's 50, 60, 70 years old, and you decide you're gonna make a change to it, you're gonna remodel, you're gonna go over 50%, or, what have you, you have to abide by the new code. I myself fell victim to that one, and it was very expensive. And, this is what you need to do, and that's why we have legal nonconformities, right? We're not sitting here, we're changing the code, we're giving you notice that shut down your business tomorrow.
No, we're not doing that.
No, exactly.
Right,
And that's why the process is as it is. Mr. Chairman, I think,
Oh, yes, William.
Can't you just grandfather them? Don't they all have licenses for tobacco shops?
Yes,
Why can't the license be grandfathered into that spot until the person decides to shut the business down or just goes out of business? Why can't you just, here's your tobacco shop, you can sell your tobacco shop to somebody, you're selling the license. They can carry the license over to the next person, but they can't open up a new store in that area.
well, I believe staff said this zoning and definition update was to avoid any sort of licensing for tobaccos. Is that understanding correct?
Even if they sold their license, the new person has to be in compliance with the current regulations, which would trigger them to come forth with
Right.
special use. And that would put the conversation at hand, well, okay, there's already 2 here, or there's already 3 here. You guys, you're gonna look at it and be like, well, whatever the ordinance gets adopted, it's hard to, you're gonna make that,
Right.
well, staff would probably say, this is not gonna be eligible, we're not gonna make a recommendation. There was a reason this code was created, is we were trying to see some of these uses cease to exist, so. Otherwise, you're just kicking the can down the road in infinity, like, when did it stop?
True.
Current owners, as, right now, can operate as businesses, but to Mr. Gaskell's point, if they wanna sell, yeah, that's a harder decision than for them.
Right. I want to just say thank you, William, for your comments. It did spark a lot of earnest discussion amongst the commissioners. And I think actually the village board will have at least some chewing to do of these issues to see what they come up with. In the meantime, prior to closing the public hearing here, I just want to say for the motion that's at hand, are we able to modify this just to, I'm not sure exactly what the language would be, but in terms of village board has a future task to discuss potential restrictions in terms of lineal foot, whatever that might be, to protect certain institutions, parentheses, schools.
Yeah, what they already have up there. One other point of clarification in the legacy code, if I may, just for the record, I'd like to educate. We have a section there that says prohibited uses. And it says, by the nature of codes being changed, it's inevitable that uses will become non-conforming. But it does say here that any existing prohibited use for example, my mechanic shop use, may change owners as long as no new prohibited use is created. So the example I gave for the Legacy District, the mechanic shop, they stayed open and never discontinued their business for the fact that they knew they could sell it as long as that business stayed in operation and there's no discontinuance of the business. Because at that point, once you discontinue a business, after so many months, we say, nope, you're done, you know. So in the legacy code, there is language that says ownership is allowed to change of a prohibited use as long as no new prohibited use is created. It's the status quo, like, don't take the mechanic shop and then take it to another level. Whatever it was today stays as it is today. Don't try to add on to it and make it a bigger, badder mechanic repair shop, because then the idea is we're really trying to kind of not hurt the people, but allow it to continue, but eventually, you know, phase out for maybe a redevelopment opportunity. Maybe eventually that property gets really hot and the guy can sell it for more money than he bought it and can put a mechanic shop anywhere.
So like if that was like, maybe that was the guy's mentee mechanic and he built it up, the other guy retires, he can get it. And,
Yeah.
or if it was his daughter or whoever else, as long as they're running the same business, that would be protected. So in Commissioner Gaskell's example about this guy trying to sell to another tobacco salesman or shop, if it's kept in operation and then just switches ownership based on, well, that's for he would be able to, or she would be able to operate without it
But
being
only
shut
in
down.
the
In the
legacy.
legacy, only in the legacy code, so.
Yeah,
only
and
in
special
certain- yeah.
uses are different. Special uses run with the owner, not the land.
Right.
This is a zoning in the legacy district that a use
Yeah.
became prohibited. It was a by right use. Now it's prohibited, not a special use. So that's why the challenge with this conversation is special uses run with the owners. Like anytime a special use, currently, we have special uses. And when they sell, that new person has to come back to you guys technically. And that's always a challenge because we don't do, you know, sometimes ownership changes and we don't know, but, and that's just to ensure that that use is being operated under the same understandings that initially when it was granted. Because things change over time and gives you an opportunity to make sure, hey, were we having problems with this? You know, like, things have changed over a couple of decades. Starbucks now, their drive-throughs are a lot different than when I was reviewing them 10, 15 years ago. It gives you guys an opportunity to say, you know what, conditions have changed. We might not want to keep this special use here anymore.
Right.
Or we have new conditions now based on what has changed.
Right. That makes sense. Even the double drive-throughs for McDonald's that are now the standard, that weren't the standard 20 years ago, or even 15 years ago. Could we get some staff guidance on the verbiage for the add to the motion? Or is it,
So are we moving to amend, do the text amendment as stated, and then come back with the distance?
Yeah, so
separately?
I was gonna ask, for convenience, would it be easier to just do it as two separate?
motions?
Motions?
Sure.
Yeah. And that's for, I think, village board to hash out. I think there's some, but I just want to say in recap, I think there's been some salient points made, in terms of an owner trying to sell his business. Commissioner Lusciuto also had mentioned the reverse, if there's a tobacco place there and a school wants to come in. You've addressed that, though, Kimberly. You said it would work to restrict them. But those are some things just to consider. But with that said, I think if, Commissioner Shaw, are you drafting up like a motion too?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I make one
Reading
more
my mind over
suggestion?
there.
Sure. Go ahead, Commissioner Gaskell.
I'd like to see in this that, if somebody wants to come in and buy one of these tobacco shops, that he'd be able to buy it no matter what the situation. If it's already there, he should be able to buy it. That's what I'd like to see. I don't know how you would want to word that and stuff, but I think that should be it.
It's an established business.
That's right.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not in big favor of all the tobacco shops in Tinley Park, but it is what it is. They're there. You know, we have to deal with it. But, you know,
But we could make it a special use then, because that's the difference between a permitted use and a non-permitted use, and allowing a non-permitted use that became non-permitted because of a zoning change to continue. We're placing another level of that, these have to be special uses. So if it wasn't a special use and we regulated these without a special use and put someone in nonconformity because of distance or one per zoning lot, and there was no special use, I believe that nonconforming language could be permitted, that similar to the legacy code, that as long as the new, a new owner, but because we're putting that extra layer of a special use, you can't just negate that process
Right, right.
because of an owner. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but that's how I understand it. We're not dealing with a permitted versus, no longer prohibited. It's gonna be a special use now, if that makes sense.
So,
why do we have to make it a special use?
that was gonna be my question.
Why does it have to be special use? Why can't it just stay the same? With the exception of putting a
I
distance on
think
it.
because there was the desire to have a better review of these on a case-by-case basis, that there are certain uses that, by nature, based on their location, need further review and consideration of the surrounding area. Otherwise, you're right, if there was no real concern about this type of business and its potential effects, you just considered it a permitted use and let it operate all day, but there was
Well, I agree with limiting them in the future. You know, if it falls within that 1,000 feet or 500, whatever is set, they can't do it. I'm just talking about the established businesses that are already there becoming somebody else's property, somebody else's business. You know, they were already there, and I want to buy this tobacco shop. I should be able to do it, no matter what the distance is. Obviously, it was good enough when they opened that one. That's my whole question. That's what I'd like to see.
you'd either have to make a decision not to make this a special use, and we'd have to structure this based on it one per zoning lot, and that'd be really it. We'd create the definitions, and either the village board through the licensing would establish a distance requirement. But didn't we open it up to more districts initially? Because it's only, it's B2 and B3, right?
It's been
Yeah.
permitted as
In-
retail in B2 and B3.
And
so
that was
we're
gonna
keeping
stay,
those zoning
but a
districts.
special use, yeah.
Right.
So you'd have to just remove the special use component.
Okay.
Permit it with a footnote of
One per zoning lot.
one per zoning lot must comply with other regulations.
Mhm.
So then for the owners of these businesses, it wouldn't affect their selling them. That's my concern.
Wouldn't it just remain status quo effectively?
Right, because there's no other overarching zoning that I would come into apply. You know, like, there'd be no special use needed to be reviewed.
So I hate to complicate this, but just, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
if I could propose a path forward for us.
Sure,
on
absolutely.
this. It sounds to me like there are a certain number of commissioners that are not in favor of special use. But there seems to be some consensus on the distance. Is that the licensing, or is it the building code?
It's under the licensing, I think. for-
Well,
Chapter
it's
120.
chapter 120 is the comprehensive
Municipal.
regulation of tobacco products.
Okay, all right. But then the definitions part, I think it sounds like there's consensus.
Yeah.
And I hate to complicate it by proposing that we split this into separate motions. But I personally wouldn't be in favor of having somebody forced to vote for or against something you know, because we threw it all into one big bucket.
Right,
Ultimately, the board is gonna decide,
yeah.
right? But they need to know where the split is and what is, where the plan commission has consensus and where we disagree. And then ultimately, it's gonna be their call.
I think it'll add clarity if they're split up, as you mentioned. So-
I do concur that I think that would be the best route, because, yeah, seems that we do have agreement on some aspects,
Yeah.
and that we do have, differences on the others, so.
And I think both sides have very good points, very salient points. It's nuanced. I think you know, like I said, there seemingly will be some sort of casualties on either side. With that said, is there any reconfiguration we can do in these motions, Lori or Kimberly, to perhaps take out the special use? I think that was what we were just talking about now, for one of them, just the way the special use can be.
Is that too complex of a concept to set in a motion here?
Because there's a lot of
This
language
evening?
there, yeah.
I would just amend the motion just to basically what you said, just remove the requirement of it being a special use. And everything else you
Well,
both agreed on.
I think some of the commissioners do agree on the special use, so I would say you
Oh.
make a motion on the special use.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's my point. I mean, you could take a straw poll. I would be voting in favor of the special use.
I would too.
And so I guess the deciding vote would be down at this end here. Because if we can't get a majority, you know, just on a straw poll, then there's no point of making the motion, because, you know.
So we going, motion to consider the text amendment as proposed, and then a second one about the distance restrictions?
Well, we had already discussed doing that.
Okay.
The question was,
Removing special use
right, would,
in tonight's motion.
setting it up as a special use, are you in favor of that or not? That's kind of ultimately the question.
So if we set up the special use,
You're
then.
tying hands. You're tying somebody's hands when with a special use.
Right.
Welcome to the Plan Commission.
Yeah. So once we set this motion, send it up to the board, keeping special use, we can't address the residents' concern with the distance. Is that what we're saying?
No,
Well,
That's not, I just want to be clear what I'm not sure what we're.
not for the
saying.
established businesses.
Yeah, my understanding with the special use is if that's removed from the language, then, as Commissioner Gaskell was mentioning, that then a business owner selling tobacco that's already near that school, he can sell his business to another person that would run that same business. Whereas special use would come across, my understanding, the Plan Commission, and it would be it would not, based on the rules we set, it would not be
So once it changes hands, that's it. It can't, then it has to go into conformity with.
New
one-
owners.
One per lot.
Yeah, so you'd probably be aced out. You know, they're buying the business, not the,
So that doesn't sound reasonable to me.
So theoretically, you couldn't sell your business
No, you
there.
can't sell your
because-
Isn't the protocol, someone has to make a motion to
right,
prove the motion, right? Or but someone has to make-
yeah.
All right, and then if someone doesn't second it and like the motion fails, right? Someone then has to propose a new motion. So either someone goes with this, seconds it, let the votes be what they are, and the dissenting votes can say why they aren't supporting it, and we could note that and bring that to the village board and saying it was a whatever vote, but here's why the yeses voted and here's why the noes voted and what their reason was, and then the village board is gonna have to take those understandings of the noes and the yeses and come up with their own motion.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah, I'm-
You know, we've beat it up enough, there's gonna be enough in the record
Yeah.
Yeah,
that they can
probably
understand why a vote
the
fell where it
reasoning,
fell.
yeah. Yeah, that's fine. We'll have to close the public hearing first, but I think that's reasonable. Will there be a need for a second motion in terms of, Commissioner Shaw had put some language down regarding,
Recommending that they amend Chapter 120 of the Comprehensive Tobacco Code to change the distance from 100 to 1,000. Right? That's what we're, okay.
okay, so with that
We'll do that
said,
as a second.
with that
motion.
said, we have talked about it. We will just jump to the motions if, but before we do that, I need to get a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, Commissioner Lushudo with the motion, Commissioner Shaw with the seconded. So all those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion is carried. I'm just trying to see, do we have standards for this? I guess we've beaten this to death, so,
Oh, that's just what the
Yeah.
special use
Go-
standards
yeah.
are,
Right, yeah.
okay.
So with the standards, for text amendments, it's my understanding that we haven't typically done a response or draft of findings for the standards. So we've drafted an ordinance for that, which is part of the report.
Okay, yeah, and we have them on our screen, so, okay, we will move on from that, and now at this time, I will entertain a motion.
Well, I will make the motion.
Sure, absolutely, Commissioner Shaw.
Pull it back up for me there. Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to recommend that the village board amend various sections of the zoning ordinance to as described in the November 18th, 2021 staff report and drafted ordinance amending section 2B definitions, section VB Schedule 1, schedule of permitted uses by use type, and section 12, section 3.A, table 3.A.2, legacy code, prohibited uses, by defining and regulating tobacco and nicotine-related retail uses to allow tobacco stores as a special use in the B2 community shopping and the B3 general business and commercial zoning districts with a maximum of 1 per zoning lot, and to allow accessory tobacco sales as a permitted use in the B1 neighborhood shopping, B2 community shopping, B3 general business and commercial, B4 office and service business, and B5 automotive service business zoning districts.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Shaw, seconded by Commissioner Lushudo. Lori, at this time, could I have a roll call?
Commissioner Gaskell?
No.
Commissioner Lushudo?
No.
Commissioner Shaw?
Yes.
Commissioner Truxell?
No.
Chairman Gray?
Yes. Okay, the motion fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I'd like to make another motion to recommend that the board amend Chapter 120 of the Comprehensive Tobacco Code. Is that correct?
The code is Chapter 120, Comprehensive Regulation of Tobacco Products.
Comprehensive Regulation of Tobacco Products to change the minimum required distance from 100 feet to 1,000 feet from certain businesses.
Certain institutions.
Sorry, certain
Certain
institutions.
institutions.
Thank you.
And those certain institutions, just for clarity, the umbrella is schools, recreational centers, places,
I'll read the
definition.
I'll read the code as is, section 120.10, proximity to certain institutions. It shall be unlawful for any person to sell, offer for sale, give away, or deliver tobacco products within 100 feet of any school, childcare facility, or other building used for education or recreational programs for persons under the age of 18 years.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, Motion made by Commissioner Shaw, seconded by Commissioner Gaskell. Lori, could you take a roll call?
Commissioner Gaskell.
Yes.
Commissioner Lucido.
Yes.
Commissioner Shaw.
Yes.
Commissioner Truxell.
Yes.
Chairman Gray.
Yes. Okay, that motion is carried. Staff, just, I want some guidance, since there's split motions, one failed, one carries. What is the next step?
I'll just take the discussion to the village board, and they're gonna have to decide. There wasn't a majority support for making it a special use, but that, that it will be a discussion then they can decide on. And that also the recommendation to increase the section that has the distance was unanimously recommended. But all other parts of the recommendation that was presented, i.e. the definition, was supported, and the one per zoning lot was supported. Is that correct? And the most, but it was discussed. I think
Yes.
there's still some concerns, so. I think you guys did some great conversation, and let the village board now kind of chew on it.
Right. And I wish the village board good luck. I think because of all the different people there, you're gonna get the same kind of split. I hope there's some clarity
Sure.
and some, some sort of, at least agreement for the village board. It's very nuanced, so
Yeah.
good luck to them. And I'm assuming you'll bring that up on the December 9th?
I'm not sure. Actually, the next meeting is December 2nd. And
Oh, 2nd.
with this I might have to do some digesting myself, and with next week, with it being Thanksgiving, it might be who knows?
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you, and thank all the plan commissioners for a really good, hearty discussion, and William for sparking that discussion. With that, staff, do you have any good of the order to present?
Just, I attended the Avocado Theory ribbon cutting. It was a great event. I was grateful for those that came out and supported. It's just really good to hear their family story of why they got into business and why they chose Tinley. It really had a lot to do with the community, and they really did say there is a different feel when they participated in this community that really drove them to make that business decision. That they really felt that there's just a different vibe in our downtown, and the people really come out, and that's what separated us from other communities that they were looking at. So good to hear. We're working diligently with Pappas Gourmet Popcorn, who will hopefully be our first retailer in the Boulevard. Their plans are approved. It's just now kind of getting everything going. As we all know, it's difficult in getting contractors and stuff, but we're really trying to get them across the finish line to be open before the holidays. So you'll start seeing some activity there. Our 7-Eleven on 171st in Harlem, we had their kind of grand opening as well. So happy to see that active. It's a beautiful store.
I gassed up there, I think on its first day, I can't remember if that was, I think it was Saturday.
Yeah.
I gassed up, and they were putting up balloons around the door.
Yep,
so.
and we got to meet Mr. Slurpee, us planners, got to get a picture. Kudos to Dan Ritter, who really worked really hard on that site. We knew there was concerns about traffic and access points, and he did a really good job in ironing through all that. And we really hope it's actually a more improved intersection just by it being more lit up and all the improvements they made. So you'll start seeing then to the south here of that center in short order, hopefully in the next couple weeks, pending MWRD approval, getting the Starbucks / multi-tenant center under construction as well. So that'll be a great addition to that corridor. And also, we are having some positive activity on the former Tribes location that we hope that we might have a good tenant to occupy that space and bring it back to life. So change of use was submitted, and it'd be a similar type of entity, just with a different group. And I think it's been a site we have been focusing on and trying to attract another restaurant.
It's a very nice building, very good location. It's got that little outdoor, so it'd be very good to
Yeah.
see that be filled again.
And then we'll just be advertising here in short order the 2 vacancies that we now are gonna have. Well, Kyla, we haven't, and then Jennifer Vargas is stepping down. So we're gonna be posting for Plan Commission. If you know of any good candidates, send them our way. Just preface the time and dedication it takes, so.
Have them watch this meeting.
Yeah. You know, Kurt, welcome to the board. You did jump in the deep end right off the bat, which is good, because this is how it should be, very organic, very in real-time discussions to hash out some of these nuanced issues.
Yeah, they're all good points. It's a
Yeah.
good discussion.
Yeah, we have a good board, yeah.
Oh,
Any other good of the order?
I think that's it.
Okay, excellent. Last, or not last, but is there any further comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to adjourning the meeting for tonight. May I have a motion? Okay, a motion to adjourn the meeting was made by Commissioner Gaskell, seconded by Commissioner Lasciuto. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? No, okay, motion carried. Good night, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Good night.